Yes, the diorama project, inspired by this photo I took in Japan almost a year ago, is still going. Just taking me a lot longer than I thought. Every diorama needs a good foundation, so this video I'm constructing the base for the building along with a portion of the road you see here. I bought a small square of insulation foam and measured out the size I needed. I tried cutting the foam with a knife, with some luck. But I really need to get a foam wire cutter. And there we go. I kept the base small, as at 1/48 scale, it's going to be fairly large. I guess I'm used to N scale, which is 4 times smaller. After cutting the base in half lengthwise, this time on my bandsaw, I grabbed a piece of scrap plywood that was just the right size, and I glued half of the base on with another scrap of plywood on top to spread the clamp pressure. And here's the other half that will be glued on later. Again on my bandsaw, I cut the slope in the base. The road slopes down on a slight incline, so I wanted to replicate that. The other half had a step cut into it. I'm checking the building fit here and it's looking good. Next step is to cut a relief in the base for these gratings you see in a shot from Google Street View. These typically cover the gutters at the side of streets in Japan. I 3D printed these grates in resin. Now I just need to measure and then carefully carve out a recess so that the gratings fit flush with the surface of the road. Now I can finally glue on the second half of the base with some wood glue and then clamp it again overnight. I noticed that the recess I made for the gratings was a bit too deep, and I also noticed that my 3D printed gratings were warping a bit, so I decided to glue them onto this piece of cardstock. Some of the gratings had to be sanded as they still had support remnants on them from the 3D printing. In my garage, I gave the gratings a primer coat and then dusted them with silver. While I had the airbrush out, I also gave the base a prime coat of black. I'm not sure what happened with the strange blotches, but that is being covered now with a light spray of gray, trying not to get full coverage, so there's some variation. It isn't perfect, as I still need to practice more with my airbrush. I'm still having a few issues here and there. I realized I lost the depth of the grading, so I tried a black wash. Not bad, but then I applied a heavier wash of black off camera that almost ruined my previous painting. So I decided to rescue it with some light dry brushing with silver. And that seemed to work okay. Now for the road lines and crosswalk zebra stripes. I measured out where they should go, and then I used quite a bit of Tamiya masking tape, masking off the areas that would stay gray. And then back to the garage for a coat of white paint with the airbrush. And the reveal. Unfortunately, I had quite a bit of bleeding of the paint underneath the masking tape. So I did a bit of touch up on the road with a paintbrush and a light gray paint. And finally I touched up the white lines. You may wonder why the lines have to be so crisp. Well, it looks like the road lines were newly repainted close to when I took my photo in 2022. And in older photos on Google Street View, the lines are actually faded. Now onto these two manhole covers. Japanese ones are always so ornate, but these ones are very plain. I manipulated a photo from Google Street View and printed them out at scale. First tried to cut them out with scissors and that didn't work well. Then I remembered that I got this old hole punch from my dad. That worked much better, but I think the punches are quite dull. Looking good, but I have to recess them in as well into the pavement. So with the same size hole punch, I put dents into the foam road and then glued in the covers. glued in the gratings as well. At this point, I decided to dress up the sides of the diorama with some veneer rather than the more common black paint. This was a bit of work as I had to measure and trace the odd shapes of especially the front onto the veneer. And then cut it out. Decided to stick on the veneer with my Japanese double-sided tape. This stuff is great, and I wish I would have bought much more than just one roll last November. When I go to Japan again next spring, I definitely will buy some more. Once that piece was on, I trimmed the ends flush, and then I proceeded with the other 3 sides. Off camera, I used some wood filler to fill some of the gaps in the corners. Now for some finish and protectant. I chose Odie's oil simply because I have some on hand for my woodworking projects, and I love the stuff. It's made from natural materials and smells great. I just rubbed it on, and after about an hour I buffed off any excess. I figured the road could use a bit more variation in lightening, so I grabbed some grey acrylic craft paint and one of my wife's makeup sponges and stippled on the grey. I wasn't happy with those street grates. They were still warping even after being glued down. So I redesigned them as 2 long pieces. I had to split them up because my printer is not big enough. These turned out better, and I painted them the same way, black primer coat and then a dry brush of silver. I decided to glue them in place with adhesive caulk this time. The thicker consistency of the caulk allowed me to get the height just right. To avoid any warping, I placed a long strip of leftover Sintra and weighed it down overnight. Now it's time to finally glue down the building on the base. Since it's abandoned, I'm not adding any lights. The back, by the way, will get a fresh coat of black once I'm completely done as a final step. I noticed one detail I missed, and that is this sloping piece of concrete foundation. I had to model it, so I had to do a bit of carving to get the right look. And then some patching up with spackle. There's also these cracks where the building foundation meets the road. One of the main reasons I built the base out of foam is so that I could easily carve these cracks in with my hobby knife. I cleaned up all the foam debris with an old toothbrush. And then I did a bit of masking again and added some gray paint. And then a coat of paint on the spackle once it had dried. Another detail I wanted to capture is this gravel that accumulated here in this corner. I painted on some white glue and took some fine gravel from my model railroad scenery supplies and sprinkled it on. Then with some diluted glue, video got reversed somehow. Then with some diluted glue, set the gravel in place permanently and soaked up the excess with a paper towel. Okay, final detail for the base. I promise. These 3 plates cover up the road gutter at the end of the gratings. First I had to shorten the grating, and that was easy to cut with my hobby knife. Then a few measurements for size. And like magic, we have plates. Well, not quite magic. I made up the plates in Canva from some textures I found and added the handles or whatever those are in the middle. I stuck a piece of thin styrene to the backs of the 2 of the 5 grates, as these will be loose plates that were discarded next to the building. I cut these all out very carefully. And it looks good. I carefully ran a brown marker along the edges to hide the white of the paper, and then glued them down. I did print out another sheet of plates as I needed a mini one. Tried again to glue it to thin styrene before cutting it out, but it didn't hold, so I had to glue the paper to the styrene afterwards. Fiddly little thing. And I did the same edge treatment. And then glued it in place. So there we go. We have a base for the abandoned Japanese shops building. But it's not done yet. I still have quite some details to add to the building, so stay tuned.